What is going on, guys? So over the past few months, I've done reactions to every episode of The Owl House, and I've absolutely loved it so far. I love all these characters and how they grow over time. I love this unique world that they're in, and I just love how much fun it is. And now that I've had a chance to go back and rewatch season 1, I'm going to be giving you guys my ranking of every episode from the worst to the best. Just a few things to note before we get started. I want to make it clear that no matter how critical I may get for some of the episodes that are lower on the list, I love every episode of this show. Even the episodes that just aren't as interesting to me, I still love getting sucked into this world with these characters, so I always have fun with The Owl House no matter what. But if you're doing a ranking, some episodes have to be lower, some have to be higher, that's just how it works. And because of that, this list was really hard to make. Like, there are certain episodes that could be switched around at any time based on my mood or if I were to look at them in a certain way. This is just my ranking based on my most recent viewing, and it could easily change the next time I watch this show. And most importantly, just remember that this is only my opinion. You may be surprised by some of my placements on here, and that's totally okay. I'd absolutely love to hear your guys' ranking down in the comments, so please be sure to let me know how your list compares to mine. Last thing before we get started, I just want to give a quick honorable mention to the Owl House shorts, which are called Owl Pellets. I really enjoyed those shorts. They were quick and fun, and they helped build the world a little bit, but obviously they just can't really stack up against full-length episodes. So with all of that out of the way, let's jump in and see how I rank all 19 episodes of The Owl House Season 1. So coming in at last place, we have episode 2, Witches Before Wizards. Now, some of you may be a bit surprised by this because you were probably expecting to see another episode in this spot, and I will get to that, but I want to talk about why this one is at the bottom of the list. Now, the big thing that puts this episode in last place for me is because it suffers from what I call second episode-itis. What I mean by that is, while the first episode was a fun adventure that introduced us to this world and its characters and got us really excited, and then the second episode takes place right after that, and it kind of has to do the opposite, like, oh, I'm not sure that this was actually a good idea. Oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. On top of that, the world still felt pretty small because we hadn't yet been introduced to some of the other characters, locations, and plot threads that we would get into in the next couple of episodes. So that second episode-itis is kind of what makes me not enjoy it as much as some of the other episodes. There is a lot of good stuff in here. You could tell that they were getting a better grip on Luz's character and what this show was going to be. There were a lot of really funny moments as Luz was exploring this world for the first time and then going on her magical quest. And I did like the message that they were going for, because the first episode was about Luz overcoming the people who told her that she needed to get a reality check. But in this episode, now that she is in that magical fantasy world, she kind of does need a reality check, otherwise she's gonna get into a lot of trouble. But still, at the same time, because it comes right after the first episode, the two episodes can feel a little disjointed because of that. And I honestly just wasn't always that interested in Luz's quest because it felt a little rushed and cliche, which I know it's supposed to be, but that's just how I felt. So again, it's still a good episode, and it does make some improvements over the pilot. It's just that second episode-itis is what really holds it back for me. Next at number 18, we have episode 8, Once Upon a Swap. Now, I admit I was almost tempted to switch this one with episode 2, but I think I bumped it up a spot on the list just because at this point of the season they had a better grip on what the show was, and I like how the characters are portrayed a little more. But the reason I still have this one lower on the list is because, just like the Owl Pellet shorts, it doesn't fully feel like its own cohesive episode. It really is 3 different segments about the different characters that tie together at the end. So my enjoyment of the episode was often dependent upon which character we were focusing on and how interesting the segment was at that time. It's also just a premise that's been done a lot of times. In fact, they even tried to make a joke about how cliche it is because they get right into it, and at the end Ida is like, okay, did everyone learn a valuable lesson about understanding everyone else's problems? So they do try to acknowledge that the premise is a little cliche and overdone, but they also draw attention to that fact. And it didn't seem like the characters really grew at the end because of it. Like, yeah, they come to a better understanding of each other, but it doesn't change anything. Like when Luz is like, hey, why do we all work together? They do a little joke where they're like, not it, and Luz is like, aw. And while that was funny, the episode would have come together a little more if they had actually been willing to work together, because now they have a better understanding of each other's problems. But I do admit that is just a nitpick. There is still a lot of really fun stuff throughout the episode. It's really funny seeing all the characters try to assume each other's life and getting into a ton of problems because of it. And it also kind of reminded me of Pulp Fiction in that it's like a bunch of different segments about different characters that come together. And they even end up in a really creepy shop by mistake where they're captured by the shop owner. Now granted, this episode wasn't nearly as graphic as that scene in Pulp Fiction, but it does make me think of it. And as I said, it's really cool when everything comes together at the end. That was really funny. So ultimately, it's really just because it doesn't fully feel like a cohesive episode, and I felt that the characters could have grown a little more at the end. At number 17, we have episode 10, Escape of the Palisman. Now this is the point of the video where you're going to notice a pattern with me when it comes to how I rank episodes. You'll often notice that I say while I really enjoyed the main storyline of an episode, the subplot just wasn't as interesting, and that kind of brought it down for me. Like, I was really interested with what was going on with Luz, her doing these trials to win Albert back and learning more about the Bat Queen and her history, but the subplot with King just on this playground and taking advantage of Ida in order to get into that just wasn't as interesting to me, even though it did lead to an interesting reveal at the end of the episode. Still, I did like the world building in this because it goes into Palismans, how they feel, how they're treated by people. So it was really great seeing Luz make a mistake and then her actively working to fix that mistake and then learning more about the Bat Queen and her history as a result. Still, while that is interesting, it's just not the most interesting episode out of the season, and the subplot just brings it down a little bit for me. Although, as I said, I did like at the end where they revealed that the elixir isn't fully working on Ida anymore, which foreshadows what's going to come later. But yeah, just not my favorite episode out of the bunch. Next up at number 16, we have episode 11, Sense and Insensitivity. Now, I am going to admit that I am a little unfair when it comes to this episode, because one of the reasons I don't quite enjoy it as much is not necessarily because of the episode itself, rather where it's placed in the season. Because I really enjoyed the library episode with Luz and Amity, and once that episode was done, I was so ready for them to get into more stuff like that. But then immediately after, we had the Once Upon a Swap episode, which I've already talked about, and then the next couple episodes felt more like filler episodes. So by the time we got around to Sense and Insensitivity, I was just so ready for them to start getting back into the really, really interesting episodes that I may be a little unfair in my judgment of it. So because of that, let's talk about all the good stuff in this episode. I really like the premise of a writing competition, Luz and King working together but having creative differences over that. I also really, really like the message and the visual metaphor at the end about how deadlines or crunch time can stifle creativity and lead to burnout. I could really relate to that because I'm the type of person who works really slowly when it comes to editing videos and getting things out, and if I try to put too much pressure on myself, I get burned out and then just don't want to do anything anymore. So I really like that, and I thought how they visualized it was very clever. They also threw in some really nice meta commentary about how fans can get too critical or too obsessed with something, which is probably the Owl House writers having a bit of fun. Still, there were parts of the episode I just wasn't crazy about, like seeing King just be rude to Luz and trash on her ideas. I just didn't really like that, but I did like how he eventually apologized and realized that he had made a mistake. So there's really not a whole lot of bad things to say about this episode, and I do admit I am a little unfair to it because of its placement in the season, but this is my list and I just have to be honest. Then at number 15, we have episode 1, A Lying Witch and a Warden. Now again, I'm sure many of you were expecting to see this at the bottom of the list because I often see people comment that episode 1 is the worst episode. And there definitely is some truth to that. Like, Luz's character is a little inconsistent at times, and she's not quite the same overall as she would be in later episodes. You can tell that they were still trying to figure out some of the characters in this world and exactly who it was going to be aimed at. So there are some moments where the episode does feel a little messy because of that. But at the same time, I still really love this episode because it's the one that introduced me to this world. I always love the beginnings of stories when a character is going on a journey for the first time. I love seeing Luz's reactions and her enthusiasm as she explores all these different things because it makes me feel the same way. And despite what I said about Luz's character and some aspects of the show feeling different, that also makes it feel unique and you get something out of it that you don't quite get out of the rest of the season. Now yeah, this is the episode where the central message that it's going for is a little too obvious, like Luz even flat out states it at one point. But at the same time, it's a really good message and it's an important step in the beginning of Luz's story, and it's just so much fun at the end where she gets all the prisoners to team up with her and take down the warden that I can't just help smiling at it anyway. So while I do acknowledge this episode's problems, which is why it's number 15, I also admit that I still love it, which is what bumps it up a few spots on the ranking for me. At number 14, we have episode 14, Really Small Problems. Now, I initially had this episode a little higher on the list because there's a lot of things in it that I love, but there are a few problems that I have, which I'll get into in a little bit. Now, the first thing I love about this episode is Luz and King. I loved that it focused on them and their relationship. It just has so many sweet moments, and it really brings out the best in Luz. Like, this is one of the best episodes for Luz, in my opinion. She's just so nice, caring, and fun. It's so great seeing her interact with both King and her friends. Now, Obviously that leads to Luz being a little oblivious throughout the episode, which is one of her consistent character flaws, but it's still great seeing her just be such a good person. I also love the music in this episode. Like, the music is just so good in this show, especially in the second half of the season, and there were so many musical montages in here that I loved it so much. And it is nice to see a bit more of King's vulnerable side, like his insecurity about how he feels, why he's so attached to Luz and wants to spend time with her. And I felt that he did grow and learn a good lesson by the end, so that was all great. Now, the couple things that brought the episode down a bit for me is the return of Tibbles. I don't hate him, I just don't think he's as interesting as some of the other villains in the show, so I'm not as compelled as I would be in other episodes. But I think the episode's biggest missed opportunity was actually the end when King is apologizing for his mistakes. I thought that could have been a great opportunity for Gus and Willow to do the same thing. Because think about it, at the beginning of the episode, they were kind of oblivious to King's feelings and not noticing how hard it was for him to keep up because he's the smallest one in the group. And then after they're shrunk with the potion, now it's their turn to be really small and not be noticed and have trouble keeping up with their friends. So once King apologizes, I thought that could have been a good moment of empathy where they're like, yeah, we finally understand how you feel. We're sorry we treated you that way. Now, granted, I know King was the one who really screwed up by making them small, but I thought it would have been a nice moment of connection between them and it would have brought the episode together a little more. So overall, still a really good episode, just those couple changes I think they could have made that would have had the episode work a lot better. Next at number 13, we have episode 6, Hootie's Moving Hassle. Now this episode is kind of similar to the last one in that a lot of it focuses on Luz, Willow, and Gus, and it also features Tibbles as one of the villains. But the reason I put this one above Really Small Problems is that I love the main plot of the episode. I like how it focuses on peer pressure and Luz trying not to disappoint her friends. Because that's one of the great things about Luz is that she's always trying to help people and she wants to fix their problems, but she maybe doesn't always think it through first. And all that stuff with bringing the Owl House to life with the Moonlight Conjuring was a lot of fun. I like seeing them go around and mess with people. It also gave us another glimpse into the history and relationship between Willow and Amity. There was that great scene where they're hanging on the branch and she kind of explains that she and Amity used to be friends, but they stopped hanging out after Willow didn't develop her magical abilities quickly enough. As I've said, I love these characters, so I always like getting to learn more about them. So that was a big highlight of the episode for me. So yeah, I just love seeing these three hanging out and growing as friends and learning some things together. So it's a very nice episode overall. At number 12, we have episode 4, The Intruder. Now, the biggest plus of this episode for me was how focused it feels and how it brings all the characters that it focuses on together in one place. Again, the pattern you're noticing by now is that while I sometimes really like the main plot, I'm not always crazy about the side plot and that can drag the episode down for me. But this episode is kind of a bottle episode in that it primarily takes place in the Owl House, so it's just focusing on the small group of characters in there. And I thought the premise was really interesting, how you think that it's about a demon haunting the house, but then it turns out to be Ida who is cursed and learning more about that. That was the initial setup for a really interesting arc that would be developed over the rest of the season, and I love that we got to go into it. And I just love that the characters had a chance to grow and they all had something to bond over in this episode. King got to be a teacher to Luz. Luz learned something a bit from him. They both learned something more about Ida and they kind of connected over that. But what I really loved about this episode is how Luz finally discovers to do her own form of magic, how she uses that to save Ida. And then there's just this absolutely beautiful moment where King is just like, shh, look. And then Ida looks over into the corner and sees Luz just so happy drawing the symbols and making the light spells. She's just like, incredible. That was just such a fantastic, heartwarming moment with all the characters, and I think that's honestly what brings the episode up to this point in the list for me. And as I said, the foreshadowing at the end of who cursed Ida, that question that's going to be raised throughout the rest of the season, was just really engaging and made me so excited to see what comes next. At number 11, we have episode 9, Something Ventured, Someone Framed. Now, the biggest appeal of the episode for me right off the bat was the initial premise of Luz being the only human getting to go to a human appreciation society. Because one of the biggest strengths of the show is how it gets us interested in this world and how we connect to the situation by seeing it through Luz's eyes. She's the only human in this world, so when she goes on all these adventures and does all these things, that's our way of getting to experience this stuff through her. And I know that I would love to go to a human appreciation society and get to be the only human there. I know I would just have a ton of fun with that. And I also like that this episode focused more on Gus, what he wants, what his fears are, what he's trying to accomplish at school. And that also afforded the opportunity to focus on his friendship with Luz, and I thought it was really sweet. I even really like the subplot with Ida having to fix all the mistakes that she made when she was a student in order to get Luz in. It just shows that she's so dedicated to Luz being happy and doing what's best for her, and there's a lot of really funny moments to go with it. So overall, it's a really great episode. Now, I feel what kind of draws it back for me is the character of Bartholomew. I think I'm getting his name right. I just think he's really annoying. They don't even try to make him a potentially redeemable bully like Amity was. He's just really annoying and full of himself right from the get-go. They even have a scene where he opens up to everyone and apologizes and all that, but then they immediately reveal that he was just using it as a tactic and that he doesn't care about that sort of thing. That could obviously change in season 2, but for the time being, it seems like they're not even trying to make him a redeemable character. He's just really irritating to me. But other than that, it was a really good episode overall, and I loved how it ended with Luz finally getting enrolled into Hexside, and I could not wait to see what came after that. And now from here, we move into the top 10, the absolute best of the best, my favorite episodes of the Owl House that I could probably watch over and over again, and many of them could be switched around, honestly, because they're all just so good. But this is my best attempt to rank them based on my most recent viewing, so let's get into that. So starting off at number 10, we have episode 3, I Was a Teenage Abomination. Now, I think this is the episode where the show really started to come together. This was the show's first great episode. Episode 1 was kind of trying to figure out what the show was going to be. Episode 2 was kind of dealing with transitioning from that. But this is the episode where they started to get into the really good stuff. Luz being introduced to Hexside, meeting all her friends, her rivalry with Amity, which obviously I love the stuff that happens with Amity later in the season. But honestly, I really like her here too, because even though she is the bully, she's also kind of entertaining, and I love the scenes with her trying to expose Luz and just how angry she can get. It really does numbers to show just how far she comes by the end of the season, and it's great. And as I've said, one of the best aspects of this show is us getting to experience this world through Luz, so whenever she's surprised or excited or experiencing something, we feel that too. So seeing her get to interact with Willow and then Gus and then pretend to be an abomination, all that stuff was just so hilarious, and I loved it. And it even had some really, really tense moments, like the scene where it looked like Principal Bum was going to cut her open and then they have to escape. And I like that Willow gets to switch the plant track and finally start doing what she wants to do, and there was a lot of fun stuff going forward. I guess really the only thing holding it back is the fact that it's so early in the season. There was just a lot of things that I was waiting to see. I really wanted to see Luz get into Hexside, but then she was banned at the end of this episode. I was really interested to see what development Amity was going to have and why people loved her character so much, but in this episode she's mostly just the bully or the rival or whatever. So that's really the only stuff holding it back, because there are episodes with a similar premise that would just do it a little better, but overall it was the episode where I thought this season really started to get good, and I absolutely love it. Next up at number 9, we have episode 5, Convention. Going off what I just said, this is an episode that has a similar premise with Luz discovering new elements of this world and having a rivalry with Amity. But I think this episode takes it up a notch because there's just so much interesting stuff that's going on. First off, I love everything that happens with Luz and Amity. I love how they're perfect foils to each other. And I like how they managed to connect that with what's going on with Ida and Lilith. I liked learning more about Lilith and her history with Ida. I like seeing their rivalry. So the contrast between Ida and Luz and Lilith and Amity was just really great, especially when you get to the magical showdown. But then the episode takes you by surprise when you suddenly start to see a different side of Amity. For example, Luz and Amity both cheated in the duel, and Luz felt really bad about it and apologetic. But when you think about it, Amity didn't even know she was cheating. And that's a really interesting comparison between the two that I didn't expect, is that Amity may be a jerk and she may be full of herself, but she also has a sense of honor, and she often thinks that she's doing the right thing, or is at least in the right. And then we get to see more into her personal motivations, how she's worked so hard her whole life to get to the top, and how much her reputation means to her in this world where it's kind of important for getting into a good coven. And then there's that really nice moment where they get to bond over that and learn more about each other, so that opens the door for how they'll eventually become friends in other episodes. Not to mention that the action in this episode was great. Like, some of the action in the first couple episodes seemed a little choppy when they're moving around really fast, maybe because they were just trying to figure out the style. But I loved the magical duel between Ida and Lilith, and that was really cool. And And overall, it was just interesting to learn about the coven system, how that works, and although Ida points out the problems with it, it's still cool to see different magical tracks for different kinds of witches. It's just fun to think about. Again, I guess the only thing really holding it back is that it's early in the season. There are lots of things you want them to get to. Like once Luz and Amity have that moment, you really want to see them reconcile and become friends. When you see the final moment between Ida and Lilith, you want to see more of them, and you want to see if maybe Lilith is the one who cursed Ida, if that's all gonna tie together. And they even threw in a fun bit of foreshadowing, which they still haven't gotten to yet, which is Ida's parents, so I hope that they show up in season 2. So overall, really great episode, and it left me very excited to see what was gonna happen in the next few episodes. Now at number 8, we have episode 7, Lost in Language. You're probably seeing another pattern here in that it was the odd-numbered episodes that were winning me over for a while. And also the fact that a lot of them have to do with Amity. Luz going to a library is a perfect opportunity to show more about this world and some of the information about it. And again, it afforded her an opportunity to learn more about Amity. She sees that she likes to read to kids, that they're actually interested in some of the same stuff. We also got to meet Amity's older siblings, which I had very mixed feelings on them at first. On the one hand, they were really cool and I loved their personality, but at the same time, they were kind of jerks to Amity, and you started to understand why she, in turn, is a jerk to other people. But there were just so many hilarious moments of them pulling pranks that I was just laughing so hard. And then when they come back at night and all the stories and the unique ideas are coming to life, I love that premise so much. That is just such an interesting idea that would be so cool to be able to do. And that made it a bit more upsetting when they revealed that they were going to post Amity's diary all over the school. But they made up for it by Luz and Amity having to work together to stop this monster that Luz unintentionally created. I love the moment at the end where Luz tries to make things right by offering Amity a copy of the book in the series that they both like. And then Amity is like, maybe you're not as bad as I thought you were. I haven't exactly been that friendly either. I'll think on that. The reason I love that moment so much is because I feel what can really define a person's character and their integrity is whether or not they're willing to consider that they're wrong or to think about their life and their actions. That just made me have such a huge amount of respect for Amity, is that she's willing to admit that she may have made a mistake and think about how she could be better, and I just loved it. I love that the episode ended on that. It made you wonder, are they still going to be rivals going forward, or are they going to be friends now? Who knows? And on top of that, we got a pretty funny subplot about Ida and King having to take care of these bat babies. And that also set up the Bat Queen to come back in future episodes, so I was really excited to see that. So just like the previous 2 episodes, I loved this one, and I loved seeing Luz and Amity continue to develop as characters, and it just has a really fun premise that ties the whole thing together. Next up at number 7, we have episode 18, Agony of a Witch. I know, many of you think that this is the best episode and we're probably expecting it to be a little higher on the list, but just hear me out. Agony of a Witch is a great episode. This time rewatching it, my eyes watered up quite a few times, especially at the end. And it finally got to stuff that we had been waiting to see throughout the entire season, Lilith and Ida's rivalry coming to a head, getting to see Emperor Belos, wondering what he's up to. I also really loved the field trip because it was an opportunity to learn more about the history of this world. I always loved lore and backstory. And it was also nice seeing Luz and her friends team up to pull a heist to try to save Ida, even though it goes horribly, horribly wrong. And oh my god, the last 5 minutes of this episode are utter perfection in every sense of the word. I love the dialogue between Ida and Lilith. It is so well written. The animation for their magic duel is just unbelievably amazing. I loved every second of that. And as I said, if you're talking about emotional moments that pull on your heartstrings, this has some of the most heartbreaking moments in the entire season. Luz trapped inside a bubble begging Ida to stop so that she won't turn into the owl beast. Lilith finally confessing that she was the one who cursed Ida, and Ida just going all out at her. And probably the most heartbreaking moment where the curse finally starts to overtake Ida, possibly for good, and she's saying goodbye to Luz and thanking her for being in her life. It actually made me feel bad for not shedding tears. As I said, I got so emotional, my eyes watered up, but I honestly just don't really cry when I watch movies and TV shows, but this episode made me feel guilty for not crying, I can tell you that. And then just the way it ended with Luz walking back to the owl house, which this is what people in the comments pointed out to me, is that she would have had to walk back to the owl house all night just thinking about how badly she screwed up and how she just lost someone she cared about. That was just such a powerful way to end the episode, because seeing Luz cry, she does not deserve that. She is too good of a person. I guess maybe that's also what holds the episode back a little for me, is its lack of closure and how it ends on a note that just makes you so angry and wanting to see the next episode. I do have a few other nitpicks though, because as great as the last 5 minutes are, I feel that some of the episode before that is primarily set up for the season finale and just, giving us information about this world. So nothing that is bad, just not as interesting as the last 5 minutes. And obviously you guys know I have to say this, I just wanted Amity to be in this episode so much. I understand why she was not in this episode, one, because she has a broken leg, but also they probably needed a break because she was featured so heavily in the last 2 episodes. You can't miss something if it's never gone, and if she had been there, I probably would have been too distracted by all the Lumini moments. So I like that they just focused on Luz and Willow and Gus so that the story would feel a little more focused on the really important things that were going on. But again, I love Amity, and I always just want her to be a part of the team. So that's another nitpick I have. Other than that, this was a fantastic episode. I love how we got to learn so much new stuff. I love how things came to a head, and I love that it perfectly set up what was going to come next. I was so excited to see what would happen in the season finale. Next at number 6 is episode 12, Adventures in the Elements. Now, I will admit that one of the reasons I ranked this episode higher on the list is kind of the opposite of the reason that I ranked episode 11 lower on the list. Because you remember when I talked about that episode, the reason it was lower on the list was not necessarily because it was bad, but just because of its placement in the season. Because by the time I got to that episode, I was just really ready for them to start getting into the really interesting and really emotional stuff. And then this episode came right after that, so I do admit that's one of the reasons I bump it up a little bit and why I enjoy it so much. Still, putting that aside, there's just a lot to love in this episode. I love that they focused more on Luz and Ida and their relationship and actually learning to do magic. That's one of the things I feel that they haven't done nearly enough in this season, and I understand why, because it can't just all happen at once and they're kind of in a tricky situation with Luz being a human. But it was great that they got here, and I like how their style of teaching contrasts with how Amity is learning to do magic. She really wants Luz to connect with the island, really learn what magic is all about, and do it in a way that is best for her based on who she is. And it's just so hilarious seeing Luz trying to impress Amity and hide the fact that she's worried about getting into the baby class and that she doesn't actually know that many spells. And I was actually surprised to see that Luz and Amity are friends at this point, because it seems they must have been in contact at least a little bit before the events of this episode in order to set up a time to get her book back, so they're already kind of friends at the beginning. And then in this episode, Amity seems to have really warmed up to Luz, although there is obviously conflict between them later when Luz ends up making a big mistake. And what's actually kind of funny about that mistake that I didn't notice the first time I reacted to it, but some people pointed out to me, because I made a comment that it was similar to an episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender where Aang tries to learn firebending too soon and he ends up hurting Katara. And then someone pointed out to me that apparently the person who voiced Katara is the same person who voiced Amity, so that was just a really fun coincidence, or was it? And then once Ida and the twins get captured, I love everything that happens after that. Like, Amity is still mad at Luz for her mistake, but she's also really concerned. She's like, just stay here, you'll only get hurt. And then she puts her in that barrier, which is basically like being trapped in a magical baby playpen, which ties into Luz's fear for the episode. And then she gets that chance to sit back, connect with the island, and discover that magic is everywhere and that she can make new symbols in order to do things. That was so great because I love the balance of Ida being a teacher to Luz, but Luz also having to find her own way in teaching Ida in turn. And then Luz and Amity team up, they defeat the monster, and a lot more adorable stuff at the end. This episode even kind of redeemed the twins for me. Like, yeah, they are still jerks to Amity at times, but it's more like brother, sister bickering now. And there were some nice touching and supportive moments with Amity and them, so that was all really great. Now, as usual, the subplot with King bringing those stuffed animals to life, not as interesting, but it led to some really hilarious and actually kind of horrifying moments with him and Hootie at the end. So while I admit that my ranking for this episode is a little biased, I also really love it, and there's just so much great stuff in it that I had been waiting to see. Moving into the top 5, we have episode 17, Wing It Like Witches. Now, kind of like the last one, I admit that I am a little biased in putting this one higher on the list, and I acknowledge that some of the episodes lower on the list are technically better, but I just had so much fun with this episode throughout, and there were so many great moments that bumped it up in the top 5 for me. I love how the episode starts showing that Basha is still a bully, but things have changed now. A lot of the student body actually really likes Willa now. She's feeling more confident, and Amity is living up to her promise from a couple episodes ago, saying that she's not gonna let Basha pick on them anymore. Now, Basha relentlessly picking on Willow and her friends was infuriating for a lot of the episode, but it just makes you root for the characters even more and make them want to win. There's also a lot of fun when it came to the Grudgeby stuff, throwing in sports montages, all of that jazz. But okay, I'll be honest, you guys know the real reason I love this episode so much. The Lumini moments were just so unbelievably adorable. It's just so crazy to think how much Amity's relationship with Luz has changed at the beginning of the season. Like, at the beginning, she could not stand Luz, and she was just a lot angrier and full of herself all the time. And now here, it's like really, really obvious how much she has a crush on Luz, and I love it. Another thing I came to appreciate about that is that I actually really like that they made it obvious. Because sometimes when it comes to same-sex relationships in other shows, it's not always incredibly obvious right off the bat, and so people use that as an opportunity to dismiss it, like, oh no, they're just really good friends, or it's more like a sisterly bond or whatever. But no, they threw out all subtlety. Amity is blushing throughout the entire episode. She gets really nervous whenever Luz gets closer to her. She even uses the L word when she's talking to the others about Luz. Honestly, I think this scene says it all.
Me? On a team with you? Running around in cute uniforms? Sweating? I gotta go! Huh. Well, I guess she's out.
Yep, they somehow managed to get away with that on a Disney Channel show, and it's amazing. But putting all that stuff aside, I just honestly love how Amity grows in this episode, and how all the characters grow, really. And as I said, the final Grudgeby match was really entertaining, and even though they lost, they got to throw in some jabs at the Harry Potter franchise, which I thought was hilarious. I think what really made me love this episode was the ending. The final montage of just everything falling into place, all the characters getting together at the Owl House. Amity shows up, and then Hootie swoops her onto the couch, and that is just such a perfect moment. All the characters together, everything is finally working out. Amity has a place to go, she has real friends, it's heartwarming. The final guitar riff to go along with it. It's probably the best ending to an episode in the entire season, and it made me love it so much. So yeah, while I do admit that some of the episodes lower on the list may technically be better than this one, I just really enjoyed it, had a lot of fun with it. I love some of the things that they were able to put into it, and it just wrapped up so perfectly that I can't help but putting it here. At number 4, we have episode 13, The First Day. Now, I was actually kind of surprised I ended up putting this one so high on the list, especially in comparison to some other episodes, but upon rewatching it, I just realized how much this episode really speaks to me. First off, they finally did what I had been waiting so long to see, is that Luz was finally going to magic school. She was going to be able to interact with all her friends on a regular basis, to be learning new skills and getting into all kinds of fun shenanigans, so that drew me in immediately. I love how Amity even congratulates her when she shows up. That was awesome. But then we get to the part which makes me surprised why I put this episode so high, because initially this episode was really frustrating to me. Like, a good portion of it just made me mad. And the reason for that is because it was just mind-boggling how dumb things work at Hexside in terms of how people are put into classes. Like, I know the rules of this world are that you have to go into selective coven, but they don't even give Luz a chance to maybe try out a couple things and then figure out what she wants. They just throw her into one. And then she makes one mistake, and then you get put in a detention track where you can do nothing for the entire semester. That is so dumb. But it is consistent with the rules of this world that we have seen so far, and like with Basha bullying Will in the last episode, as infuriating as that was, it makes you really invested in the character and you so want things to succeed for them by the end. And it led to some truly great stuff, like once we get into the detention track and we meet all these characters, like I loved all these characters, and I'm sorry I can't remember any of their names at the moment. They're just not what you would expect to see in the detention track. It's not like they just don't care about school or they just like making trouble for the sake of doing so. It's that they honestly love school, they honestly want to pursue multiple interests, and being in the detention track now is just really the only way they can. And then once that monster shows up and they all have to work together using their various skills, combining magic in order to defeat it, that was a lot of fun. And as I said, it made it so satisfying when Luz finally gets to study everything that she wanted to, and there's that great animation sequence where she gets her new uniform. I loved it. And really, I think that's what speaks to me so much about this episode, is because I realized just how much I relate to Luz, both with school and just in life in general. That's kind of how I was in high school and especially in college. Like, I remember I went into college and I thought I was going to be a music major because I had been in band so much. Then suddenly my advisor sits me down and my schedule is just cram-packed with nothing but music classes, and they even signed me up for a lot of extracurricular stuff that I wasn't sure I wanted to be in, and I felt totally overwhelmed. But thankfully I went over to the theater department and I found an advisor who was able to help me switch to a major that I was more interested in. And after that, I was able to switch to a different program in the theater department that allowed me to both focus on theater, and it required you to get a second major or minor so that you could study other stuff. So studying different things and wanting to have more of a balance in what you're pursuing is how I was in school, but it's also how I am in life in general. It's one of the reasons I can't always fully commit to one thing, because I like to try out a little bit of everything and experiment with things I've never done before. That's how my channel was, especially when I was starting it out back in April. So this episode and how Luz felt in it really spoke to me, and it said to me that it's okay to be like that. You don't just have to fully commit to one thing right off the bat. You can try out a little bit of everything, and it's okay to have multiple interests, and you don't have to view yourself in a negative way. That was just something I really needed to hear at the time I watched this episode, because that really spoke to me based on what I was going through. So yeah, although I was initially surprised by how I ranked this episode, I realized just how much I loved it and how much the message spoke to me, and I was so satisfied with how it came together at the end, so that's why it gets to be number 4. So now we're moving into the top 3, and just remember that all 3 of these are great episodes. They could easily interchange based on my viewing experience or how I chose to look at them, but this is how I decided to rank them this time around, so let's see what takes the top spot. At number 3, we have episode 15, Understanding Willow. This was a fantastic episode because it has all the things that I always love in this show. I like how they finally addressed this history between Willow and Amity that we had been waiting to see. I like getting to see the various memories of back when they were friends, and it was just making me wonder what happened between these two to make them stop being friends. On top of that, there were just so many great moments of Luz and Amity working together, and it's just a fun role reversal, because initially when Luz was trying to win Amity over as his friend, she was the one who always acted weird. But now that they are good friends, and now that Amity is the one who kind of has something to hide, now she's the one acting weird, which led to so many adorable moments. And a lot of really touching moments too, like when Luz is telling her, come on, we can fix this together. And Amity blushes and is like, we can fix this together. I just love that stuff so much. This episode has some of the most gorgeous animation out of the entire season, especially when that flame creature shows up and we get a lot of colorful flashbacks. And then we get to the really big moment of the episode, which I and a lot of others had been guessing, is that Amity's parents were responsible for what happened with her and Willow. We basically saw that they said, don't be friends with Willow anymore, otherwise she'll never get into Hexside, and ever since then, Amity has kind of had to be a person that she's not. Again, it just made me feel so much more for Amity and have more respect for her, that she's finally able to overcome that and be a better person. And I love that she and Willow make things right by the end. I mean, obviously they're not friends, that would just be artificial, but like Willow said, it's a start. And I like the side plot with Ida and King showing off their various talents in order to get the interview with Gus, because obviously they needed a reason for why they don't answer the bell when Amity and Luz try to get out, and it was just really funny overall, especially when he decides to go with Hootie. Like, oh my god, what even is Hootie? I just don't know. So this episode is a perfect combination of all the things that I really love about this show. I love how it came together, and it was just a lot of fun and really touching overall. Okay, here we go. I'm very curious to see what the response will be when I give my answer, but at number 2, we have episode 16, Enchanting Gromfright. Many of you probably expected this to be number 1, especially if you watched my reaction. You saw just how much I absolutely loved that episode. And as I said, this could very easily be number 1 on any other day, but for today, it's number 2. Now, obviously, yes, this is another Luz and Amity episode, but what makes this episode work really well is how it makes them the focus and how well their stories tie together. We see Luz's insecurity and anger over the fact that she may be frail and not strong enough to really be a witch. And we see just how worried she is about her mother finding the truth and how she's eventually going to face that. She doesn't like that she's been lying to her mom. And then alongside that, Amity is also trying to deal with her fear, which at first I thought that it was going to be her parents because it would be a nice contrast to Luz. And that's really telling, because if her biggest fear is getting rejected by someone as kind and understanding as Luz, that shows just how much she really needs that connection. And of course, it led to the best part of the episode, possibly the best part of the entire season, to be honest, is the dance/duel with Grom between Luz and Amity. It It was perfection. It was so well done, so well animated. I love how they seamlessly blended a really awesome dance with them taking down this creature. And I'd also been waiting for them to get to that because for so long, I knew Lumity was coming and I knew that image online of them, but I just didn't know when it was going to happen. Then it finally happens and I'm like, oh, there's the moment I've been waiting to see. And then after they're done, Luz is like, who did you want to ask out? And she's like, oh, it's not important. You find out that it was Luz. It was just all so great. But then they ended the episode in a really realistic way because let's be honest, as great as high school proms can be, there's also kind of a sense of depression that comes after them because you just felt so much anxiety. You wonder, did the night go perfectly? You're just so full of emotion. So they captured that really well with both Luz and Amity. And it was also cool because Luz finally decides to open up and start being a little more honest about her mom, not necessarily with where she is, but how she feels. And of course, they set up the mystery of who is writing letters to Luz's mom, so I'm going to be really interested to see where that goes. This episode is just so great because, again, it has so many elements that I love so much about this show, and it had so many outstanding scenes, and it just brings everything together really nicely, and I was very excited to see what would follow such a good episode. And I guess you guys know what comes next. At number 1, we have episode 19, Young Blood, Old Souls. The big finale to the entire season, everything coming together, so much great stuff. I love this episode so much. As I said, it was so hard to decide which of these episodes would be number 1, but this time around when I was watching it, I think the biggest reason that I put it at number 1, even though it's not as fun as some of the other episodes and they get really serious, this is the episode where I was just so consistently engaged the entire time. Like, there are plenty of episodes where I have fun the entire time or I'm interested in what's going on the entire time, but not always ones where I'm just so focused and completely engaged. But this episode had my attention right off the bat. They got right into explaining the history of this world, who Emperor Belos is, and then Luz doesn't even try to make a joke. They don't even play the theme song. She's just like, I am saving Ida, and it's a genuinely heroic moment. And speaking of seriousness, I was just so impressed with how they were able to capture that feeling perfectly and really create a sense of tension and dread. It genuinely had me on the edge of my seat wondering what was going to happen next. And if you thought the last episode was emotional, this one had so many emotional gut punches. Ida and Luz saying they love each other and saying goodbye, and Ida telling her to go back to the human world and destroy the portal. We also finally got the full story of what happened with Ida and Lilith, which was basically what I had assumed, is that she was just trying to sabotage her a little bit so that she could get ahead at the Emperor's Coven when it went horribly wrong. And that entire flashback sequence was so unbelievably well done, and it just had such a huge sense of tragedy to it. And I like that it led to Lilith and Luz teaming up together to go save Ida. And that last scene of her in the human world was just done so effectively because you see her looking longingly in the direction of her mother, but she still decides to go back and to save Ida, which makes what comes later so much more tragic. And yeah, I think the moment where I freaked out the most was where she gives up the portal to the human world to Emperor Belos, and you think that's all, but no, then they just destroy the portal. I gapped, jaw hanging down. I could not believe that Luz was willing to make that sacrifice, and it just everything changed going forward. Like, from here on out, there's just a new level of tension and drama that Luz has to overcome. I was blown away by that moment. And yeah, we've got to talk about Emperor Belos. As angry as I was at him, he was also just such a great villain. For only seeing him in 2 episodes, he's already made such a huge impression. I love his mannerisms. I'm really interested in his motivations. And he's just so powerful. Again, some great animation. I loved seeing him and Luz go head to head. It showed how far Luz has come with her own abilities, and I'm so excited to see another showdown between them. I so wish I knew who voiced his character because the voice actor did such an excellent job. I have to look that up later and find out who it was. And then our heroes escape. They've inspired a whole bunch of people. I wonder if there's going to be a revolution next season. And then Lilith does something she says she should have done a long time ago and shares the curse with Ida. And that just led to another really beautiful moment because Luz said, it's okay, I can show you what I know and we'll learn the rest together. It brings everything full circle from the beginning of the season. Luz has formed her own style of magic. She's going to kind of be the teacher now. And there's a level of uncertainty with what's going to happen next. We don't know when she's gonna see her mother again. We don't know if she's gonna be able to get back to the human realm. So while there is a nice sense of closure to this season, it also just opens the door for what could happen next, and it leaves me so engaged, especially when they end on that last shot of them trying to rebuild the portal for whatever the Day of Unity is. I need season 2 right now. I need season 2. Guys, in the end, while a lot of episodes could have taken the top spot, this one just had me so thoroughly engaged the entire time. So many jaw-dropping moments and things that we have been waiting the entire season for them to do. And it made me so incredibly excited to see what comes next. So for me, this episode takes the #1 spot. So that's my ranking of all 19 episodes from the Owl House season 1. Thank you guys so much if you've watched this far. This probably ended up being a little longer than I intended, but I love this show so much. There's just so much to talk about. I could watch these episodes over and over again, and as I said, I'm so incredibly excited to see what comes next. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you've been on the channel for a while, thank you for watching my Owl House reactions. And now it's your turn. What is your ranking of all 19 episodes of the Owl House? What are your favorite episodes? What are your least favorite episodes? Do you agree with my ranking, or is yours completely different? Whatever it is, feel free to share your thoughts down in the comments and let me know what you think. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more content. Also be sure to check out my other videos over there. It really, really does mean a lot. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you for the next video.